October 4th, 1918, 2:30 p.m., the Argonne Forest, France. Major Charles Whittlesey watches as his last carrier pigeon, a small 1-pound bird named Cher Ami, launches into the air. Within seconds, a German machine gunner spots the movement. Bullets rip through the trees. The pigeon tumbles, spiraling downward, clearly hit. Whittlesey turns away. It's over. But here's what makes absolutely no sense. 25 minutes later, that same pigeon, now missing an eye, with a bullet hole through its chest and one leg hanging by a tendon, lands at its destination. Attached to that dangling leg is a message capsule. Inside that capsule are coordinates that will save 194 American soldiers from being killed by their own artillery. How does a bird with catastrophic injuries fly 25 miles through enemy fire? What kind of communication system relies on animals in the age of telephones and radios? And why, in 1918, did the most technologically advanced military in the world still depend on a method that dates back to ancient Egypt? Today, we're breaking down the communication crisis that trapped the Lost Battalion, the engineering brilliance behind military pigeon systems, and the biological mystery of how Cher Ami accomplished what should have been impossible. Because this isn't just a story about a brave bird. It's about how World War I exposed the catastrophic failure of military communication technology and how armies were forced to rely on a 5,000-year-old solution.
Let's establish the problem first, because nothing about this makes sense without understanding the communication disaster that was World War I. In 1918, armies had telephones, they had telegraphs, they had signal lamps and heliographs. The British even experimented with wireless radio sets. On paper, commanders had more ways to communicate than at any point in human history. In reality, trench warfare had created a communication nightmare that no technology could solve. Here's why. Every advance beyond the trench line cut communication. Telephone wires, buried 3 feet underground, lasted about 6 hours once artillery bombardment started. A single shell could sever cables across a 100-yard stretch. Signal Corps teams would repair breaks, only to have the same line destroyed minutes later by the next barrage. Radio technology in 1918 was primitive and massive. The standard U.S. Army wireless set weighed 200 pounds and required a 4-man team to operate. The transmitter needed a 60-foot antenna mast, essentially a giant flag telling enemy artillery exactly where to aim. Worse, transmission range was only 3 to 5 miles under optimal conditions. In the Argonne Forest, with its dense canopy and ravines, that dropped to less than 2 miles. Visual signals? Forget it. Signal lamps required line of sight. In the Argonne's thick forest and broken terrain, you couldn't see 50 yards in any direction. Smoke signals brought immediate artillery fire. Flares revealed positions at night. The U.S. Army Signal Corps had identified this problem years before. Their solution seemed absurd. Carrier pigeons. Birds. The same communication method used by Julius Caesar and Genghis Khan. But here's what made pigeons brilliant for WW1 trench warfare. They didn't need wires, they couldn't be jammed, they flew over obstacles that blocked radio waves. They were small enough that German machine gunners rarely spotted them. Each pigeon could carry messages up to 50 miles. And most importantly, they had a 95% success rate, far better than any electronic communication system of the era. By 1918, the U.S. Army Signal Corps operated 55 pigeon lofts across France, housing 15,000 birds. The British had 22,000. The French, who pioneered military pigeon use, operated 30,000 birds and over 150 mobile lofts. This wasn't a backup system. This was primary battlefield communication. And on October 2, 1918, this ancient technology became the only hope for survival for 600 American soldiers trapped in the Argonne Forest.
Major Charles Whittlesey commanded the 308th Infantry Regiment, 77th Division, mostly New York draftees with minimal combat experience. On October 2nd, his orders were straightforward: advance through the Argonne Forest, break through German lines, and link up with French forces. The Argonne Forest was a tactical nightmare. Ancient growth trees created a canopy so thick that aerial reconnaissance was useless. The terrain was broken by ravines up to 300 feet deep. German forces had occupied this forest for 3 years, building interconnected bunker systems and establishing kill zones with overlapping machine gun fire. Whittlesey's battalion punched through the German front line faster than anyone expected. By evening on October 2nd, they had advanced over a kilometer, a massive gain by WW1 standards. Here's the problem. Units on their left and right flanks failed to advance. Whittlesey's battalion was now isolated, deep in German territory, with enemy forces surrounding them on 3 sides. By October 3rd, German units had closed the gap behind them. The Lost Battalion, actually 9 companies totaling about 600 men, was completely encircled in a ravine. No reinforcements could reach them. No supply lines existed, and critically, no communication lines connected them to headquarters. Whittlesey had brought 8 carrier pigeons in wicker basket carriers. These birds were his only link to the outside world. The first pigeon carried a message on October 3rd requesting artillery support and supplies. It reached division headquarters 40 minutes later, a communication speed that no other technology could match. The second pigeon carried coordinates of German machine gun positions, delivered successfully. But what the Lost Battalion didn't know was that headquarters had their position marked incorrectly on military maps, off by over 400 yards. On the morning of October 4th, American artillery began a bombardment intended to suppress German forces surrounding the Lost Battalion. Instead, the shells landed directly on Whittlesey's position. Imagine this. You've been surrounded by enemy forces for 2 days. You're running out of ammunition, water, and medical supplies. Wounded men are dying because you can't evacuate them. Then you hear the whistle of incoming artillery shells. For a brief moment, you think it's American fire hitting the Germans. Then, the first shell explodes 15 yards from your position, shredding 3 men with shrapnel. It's your own artillery killing you. The American bombardment on the Lost Battalion lasted 18 minutes. At least 30 men were killed or wounded by friendly fire. The survivors pressed themselves into the mud, trying to shelter behind trees and in shallow depressions. Whittlesey knew he had to stop the artillery immediately. The problem was simple and terrifying. He had already used 6 of his 8 pigeons. Only 2 birds remained. Military communication protocol required sending duplicate messages on separate pigeons. If one was shot down or lost, the second carried the same information. With only 2 birds left, Whittlesey had one chance to get this right. He pulled out message paper, thin tissue paper specifically designed for pigeon transport, each sheet weighing less than half a gram. Using a pencil stub, he wrote what would become one of the most famous military messages in American history. "We are along the road parallel to 276.4. Our own artillery is dropping a barrage directly on us. For heaven's sake, stop it." He added the precise coordinates of their position,
signed it, and placed the message in a lightweight aluminum capsule about the size of a shotgun shell. The seventh pigeon was released first. It flew directly into a tree branch, injured its wing, and fluttered to the ground. A soldier retrieved the bird, but it was too injured to fly. Whittlesey now had one pigeon remaining. One bird, one message. 194 lives depending on a 1-pound animal flying 25 miles through a battlefield. The bird's name was Cher Ami, French for dear friend. But what they didn't know was that German soldiers had been specifically trained to shoot carrier pigeons, and they were watching.
Before we get to Cher Ami's flight, you need to understand the sophisticated system behind military carrier pigeons. This wasn't just releasing a bird and hoping for the best. The U.S. Army Signal Corps Pigeon Service was a precisely engineered communication network. Here's how it actually worked. Breeding and selection. Not every pigeon could become a military carrier. The Signal Corps used homing pigeons, a breed developed over centuries specifically for their navigation ability. These birds possess a biological compass that uses the Earth's magnetic field for orientation. They also navigate using the sun's position, landmarks, and even infrasound, low-frequency sounds below human hearing range. Military pigeons underwent selection testing. Trainers would transport birds progressively longer distances and release them. Birds that consistently returned quickly and reliably were kept for service. Those that didn't were a cold-funded program. Cher Ami had been donated by British pigeon fanciers in 1918. Before being assigned to the 77th Division, Cher Ami had successfully completed 12 missions, carrying messages from 5 to 25 miles through artillery fire and machine gun zones. The loft system. Each division maintained mobile pigeon lofts, essentially portable coops mounted on trucks. Pigeons were housed at division headquarters. When infantry units advanced, they took pigeons with them in wicker basket carriers, each holding 6 to 8 birds. Here's the crucial engineering detail. Pigeons can only fly home. You cannot send a pigeon to a new destination it's never been. The bird had to be transported from its loft to the front line. Then it would fly back to that original loft when released with a message. This meant the entire pigeon communication system had to be planned before any advance. Mobile lofts had to be positioned properly, birds had to be distributed to units in advance. Once you used your pigeons, you had no communication until you returned to base or received new birds. Message systems. Messages were written on tissue paper and placed in aluminum capsules weighing just 15 grams. The capsule attached to a leather leg band on the pigeon's leg. Some birds carried 2 capsules on each leg for duplicate messages. The tissue paper itself was engineering genius. It was thin enough to minimize weight, but treated with a water-resistant coating so messages remained readable even if the bird flew through rain. Training under fire. Military pigeons underwent desensitization training. Trainers would release birds while firing rifles and artillery nearby to acclimate them to battlefield noise. Birds that panicked or refused to fly were removed from service. The survival rate of military pigeons in World War I was approximately 75% per mission in active combat zones. That meant 1 in 4 birds was killed, injured, or lost on each flight. Over multiple missions, the casualty rate climbed dramatically. By October 4, 1918, Cher Ami had already beaten the odds on 12 previous missions. Now came number 13.
2:30 p.m., October 4th, 1918. Private John Nell attached the message capsule to Cher Ami's right leg. Whittlesey held the bird carefully. Pigeons are fragile, and rough handling can injure their wings. Then he tossed Cher Ami into the air. The pigeon climbed rapidly, gaining altitude to clear the forest canopy. This was standard behavior. Pigeons fly up to establish their bearings before heading toward their home loft.
German soldiers in elevated positions spotted the bird immediately. Machine gun fire erupted. According to witness testimony from survivors of the Lost Battalion, Cher Ami was hit within seconds of release. The bird tumbled downward, clearly wounded. Men watching from the ravine thought it was dead. But here's what happened next. About 20 feet above the ground, Cher Ami recovered control. The bird leveled out and began flying erratically toward the north, the direction of the division headquarters loft. Now, let's be clear about the injuries Cher Ami sustained. We know this from the veterinary examination conducted when the bird arrived at headquarters. A bullet had passed through Cher Ami's chest, creating an entry and exit wound. The bird's right eye was destroyed, likely from shrapnel or a bullet fragment. Cher Ami's right leg, the leg carrying the message capsule, was nearly severed, hanging by a single tendon. For a human, these injuries would be immediately fatal or incapacitating. For a bird weighing less than 1 pound, with a heart the size of a peanut, the damage should have caused instant death from shock and blood loss. So how did Cher Ami keep flying? Birds have several biological advantages that mammals lack. First, their cardiovascular system operates at much higher pressure. Bird hearts pump blood at rates up to 400 beats per minute, far faster than human hearts. This means even with significant bleeding, birds can maintain blood pressure longer. Second, birds have a unique respiratory system. Unlike mammals who have lungs that inflate and deflate, birds have air sacs throughout their body. Air flows through bird lungs in one direction continuously. A bullet through the chest might puncture one air sac, but other sacs continue functioning, allowing the bird to maintain oxygen supply. Third, and this is critical, birds have a higher pain tolerance and different shock responses than mammals. Their nervous system allows them to continue functioning through injuries that would incapacitate mammals. But none of this fully explains Cher Ami's flight. The bird was essentially flying with catastrophic injuries that should have killed it within minutes. The flight distance was 25 miles. Under normal conditions, a carrier pigeon flies at speeds of 45 to 50 miles per hour. That means Cher Ami's flight should have taken approximately 30 minutes. The bird arrived at the division headquarters loft at 3:15 p.m., 45 minutes after release. Cher Ami had flown significantly slower than normal speed, likely struggling to maintain altitude with a bullet wound through the chest. When the pigeon landed at the loft, the handler immediately noticed the injuries. Cher Ami collapsed on the loft floor. The handler carefully removed the message capsule, which was still attached to the nearly severed leg. He opened the capsule and read Whittlesey's message. Within minutes, the coordinates were relayed to artillery command. The bombardment on the Lost Battalion's position stopped immediately.
Cher Ami's message arrived just in time. If the bombardment had continued another 10 minutes, casualties from friendly fire would likely have exceeded 50 men, over 25% of the remaining battalion. The Lost Battalion held their position until October 7th, when American forces finally broke through German lines and relieved them. Of the approximately 600 men who had been trapped, only 194 emerged unharmed. The rest were killed, wounded, or missing. Cher Ami survived, but barely. Army medics stabilized the bird and transported it to a veterinary hospital in Paris. Veterinarians amputated the destroyed leg and fitted Cher Ami with a small wooden prosthetic, one of the first recorded prosthetic devices ever created for a bird. The pigeon became an instant celebrity. The French government awarded Cher Ami the Croix de Guerre, a military decoration for heroism. General John Pershing personally commended the bird. Cher Ami was transported back to the United States in 1919 and lived at the Signal Corps headquarters in New Jersey until dying of the chest wound injuries in June 1919. The bird's body was preserved and mounted by a taxidermist. Today, Cher Ami remains on display at the Smithsonian National Museum of American History in Washington, D.C., standing on one leg with visible damage to the chest area, forever frozen in the moment of impossible heroism. But here's the modern relevance that nobody talks about. The communication problems that required Cher Ami's flight in 1918 still exist today. Military forces in Afghanistan and Iraq faced similar communication blackouts in mountainous terrain. Radio signals are blocked by terrain features. Satellite communications can be jammed. Electronic systems fail. Modern military forces still train with backup communication methods, including, believe it or not, carrier pigeons. The Swiss military only retired their pigeon service in 1996. The Indian military still maintains active pigeon units for communication in Kashmir's mountainous terrain where electronic signals are unreliable. The real lesson of Cher Ami isn't about a brave bird. It's about system redundancy. The U.S. Army in 1918 had telephone wires, radio equipment, visual signals, and messenger runners. Every single system failed. The only communication method that worked was the oldest, a living creature with biological navigation. Modern military strategists call this communications resilience, having multiple independent systems so that if high-tech solutions fail, low-tech backups can still function. Cher Ami represented the ultimate backup system, and when every other technology failed, that one-pound bird with catastrophic injuries delivered the message that saved 194 lives.
So here's what makes Cher Ami's story so remarkable. It wasn't just about courage or luck. It was about a sophisticated military communication system engineered over decades that used biological navigation as a solution to technological limitations. It was about breeding programs, training protocols, message encoding systems, and mobile loft networks, all designed to exploit a bird's natural ability to fly home. And when that system was reduced to a single bird, carrying a single message through enemy fire with catastrophic injuries that should have been fatal, it worked. The next time you hear someone say old technology is obsolete, remember Cher Ami. Remember that in 1918, armies with telephones, telegraphs, and radio sets still needed a bird to save 194 soldiers. Remember that sometimes the most reliable system isn't the newest or most complex. It's the one that works when everything else fails. Today, Cher Ami stands in the Smithsonian, one leg a wooden prosthetic, chest showing the bullet wound that should have killed instantly. The message capsule is displayed next to the bird, a tiny aluminum cylinder containing tissue paper that saved nearly 200 lives. If you found this story as fascinating as I did researching it, subscribe to this channel. We're not here to talk about who won battles or how many soldiers died. We're here to break down how problems were solved, how engineers, soldiers, and even pigeons found solutions when every conventional method failed. Next time, we're examining how Allied codebreakers cracked the Japanese purple cipher, not through mathematical genius alone, but through a bizarre analysis of typing patterns and human error. The solution came from studying how Japanese telegraph operators got lazy. Hit that subscribe button, because military history isn't just about wars and battles. It's about the technical brilliance that made victory possible. And sometimes, that technical